Thank you, Luisa, and thank you for the great effort you've put throughout the week with the WISH Summit and with today Children Day special symposium joined by WISH and UNICEF. Welcome back to Doha, everyone. I'm Rawa Oje, and I'll be taking you through the final panel session, Child Development in the Information Age, and then through our closing ceremony, which will include some special guest appearances. For this session, I'm joined by Professor Vikram Patel, the Pershing Square Professor of Global Health in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School at Harvard University, and Dr. Rachel Harvey from UNICEF, Regional Advisor on Child Protection, East Asia and Pacific Region, and Dr. Sharifa Nouman Al-Imadi here with me in the studio, Executive Director of Doha International Family Institute, and Professor Sonia Livingston, Professor of Social Psychology in the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Feel free throughout the panel to send us your questions and to whom you would like to address it. We will try to make this conversation as interactive as possible. Then we will move on to your Q&As, so make sure you send us your question as soon as it comes to your mind. Children today acquire more knowledge than in our own days through the digital world, but at the same time, they acquire stressful life experience, including abuse and bullying. With opportunities comes challenges, and Professor Vikram Patel will tell us more about them and the balance that we need to establish. Professor Patel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much for that, for the introduction. I'm hearing myself, so I'm just wondering, there might be, just from the technology people, I can just hear myself.
We can hear you very well.
Okay, great. But I will just say I can hear echo of myself. There's such great interest for at least a decade now, and rightly so, about the relationship between the information world, the digital world, and children's well-being, because no generation has been as connected to the internet as much as children and young people. And most of us, including myself, who are older adults, grew up in a world where this technology was just a sci-fi fantasy. Just incredible, isn't it? When I was a child, even the idea of an internet did not exist. My own child today is completely hooked. And never before has this subject been as important as right now, because thanks to the pandemic, virtually every aspect of children's lives have moved to the digital world. When thinking about this topic, for me, two key principles really are extremely important to be always on our minds. The first is to have a life course perspective. And by this, I mean to recognize that children, young children, older children, young adolescents, older adolescents are all developmentally very distinct phases of our life course. For example, the plasticity of our brain, which is essentially a description of how the brain responds to this environmental stimuli, is far greater in childhood. And yet in adolescence, peer environments are extremely important, far greater than you might find in childhood. And of course, peer environments are extremely relevant when we talk about the digital world, because for young people today, unlike when I was a young man, the peer environment is no longer the kids who live in your building, the kids who you go to school with, but in fact, the peer environment is far greater than that. It includes young people in places that you've never visited, young people you've never even really met. The second important principle is that we must keep in mind the broader context in which the digital world is being utilized. What's going on in other aspects of the child's in-person, real-world environment? And particularly for young children, that is the quality of the home environment, their parents, their siblings, their neighbors. And for adolescents, that extends to the quality of the school and neighborhood environment. What's going on in your school, what's going on in the neighborhood that you live in. We need to be also asking questions about how do these other environments and the people in those environments engage with the child during their particular interaction with the digital media. Now, many people obviously jump to the first conclusion when we think of the digital engagement and children's well-being, that it must be harmful in one way or another. But the truth is, of course, it's a much more nuanced and a much more mixed picture. What's very clear is that it isn't a binary one. It isn't the case that using digital media is harmful or not harmful. It's a far more balanced and mixed account. And for this, I'm really going to draw my attention to the Pew Research Center data that was collected a couple of years ago from teenagers in the US. And they were asked really to express their views on social media's effects on themselves, as well as on their peers. And what we found, what the Research Center reports, is that about a third of the respondents said that social media had a mostly positive effect. For example, it helped people connect, young people connect with family and friends. They found it easier to find news and information and to meet others with similar interests. But on the other hand, about a quarter said that the effect was mostly negative. And the dominant reasons for that were bullying, the spreading of nasty rumors, getting into harmful relationships, that this is particularly relevant for very vulnerable young people who, for example, can be groomed by adults for sexual purposes, and unrealistic views of others' lives, which often is very important for adolescents who often view others' lives, particularly their peers, as a way to actually be able to assess the value of their own lives. About a quarter of, about 40% felt it was neither positive or negative. More importantly, there is now robust evidence that is looking at large-scale data sets from the population and examining the relationship between the utilization of digital media on adolescent well-being and health. I really want to draw your attention to the important work of Amy Orban from Oxford and her team, and most recently, a paper that they published in Nature Human Behavior that reports on the findings from 3 such large-scale population data sets of more than 350,000 adolescents, looking at the relationship or the association between the utilization of digital technology and adolescent well-being. And what did they find? That just 0.4% of the variation of well-being could be explained by digital technology use. So it's a very small proportion of the variation that can be accounted for by digital technology use. And we really have to think of the broader environment in which these technologies are used to understand the relationship at the level of an individual. In closing, I want to look at the future. It's very clear to me, as someone who works very closely with digital environments for children and young people, that the digital world offers very unique opportunities to support a range of actions for children and young people, from the assessment of their health and learning needs to supporting them with learning and providing healthcare for particular kinds of health difficulties. But for this to be really realized, we need to be balanced in our vision about what digital platforms can achieve and what they can't. Indeed, we need to be mindful, and we can see this really playing out with the pandemic, that a sole reliance on digital platforms can actually worsen existing inequalities. Digital can never fully replace in person. Remote learning, which is something that many countries around the world have adopted in order to reduce the transmission of COVID-19, is a cruel joke for millions of families around the world, low-income families, rural families, who struggle to eke out a living in crowded homes with unreliable electricity and no internet. Or consider the needs of children with very different abilities, such as those living with autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability. They have very different abilities to cope with remote learning. Not only have policies that have essentially shifted all of learning to the digital environment fueled existing inequalities, but also conveniently forgotten that children come to school not to learn geography and physics, but they come to school to play with their friends. And this is a fundamentally important part of shaping development and well-being. Some kids also come to school to escape very difficult home environments. And indeed, in many parts of the world, school is the only place where they will get their most nutritious meal of the day. So there needs to be an acceptance of this diversity. Another important point is there needs to be an acceptance of the agency of children and young people so that we can include them in thinking about this issue. I'm very troubled by the fact that even though this age group is largely immune to the harmful effects of the pandemic, they have been asked to bear a disproportionate burden of the containment efforts. And yet, children and young people are neither at the table to discuss their needs or how they can contribute to containment efforts in solidarity with adults. Instead, as adults have often done over the millennia, we have simply treated children as bystanders whose only role is not to get in the way of adults and who, at best, are considerably irresponsible and will misbehave unless they are placed under strict controls. Finally, I hope very much that in the future we see a lot more person centered research that can help us unpack the mechanisms through which engagement with the digital world affects individual well-being. And to do that, we need to understand both the individual child's characteristics as well as the type of engagement they have with the digital world in order to be able to unpack the mechanisms that can predict good or bad health outcomes associated with digital engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Patel. I will get back to you on that last point to ask you how we can do it. Dear panelists, my question goes to all of you. As children rely more and more on digital technology for learning, fun, and friendship, what does the evidence say about how they view this medium? Ms. Harvey?
Thank you very much, and a happy World Children's Day from Bangkok. So here in East Asia, not enough is known about how children engage with online technology, their perceptions of risks, and the steps they take to mitigate risks. And in fact, even less is known about the experiences of children from marginalized groups. Understanding how they interact with social media is absolutely essential for designing effective strategies to prevent and respond to online harms. So last year, with the Center for Justice and Crime Prevention, we undertook research with young people, as well as frontline workers and caregivers, to plug this gap. And we included children who are often excluded from these conversations, children with disabilities, refugee children, children on the streets, and victims of exploitation. First, we found that regardless of their economic situation or vulnerability profile, technology was central to the children's lives we spoke to. Nearly all children had access to mobile devices and the internet, either directly or through friends and family. Second, use of social media is widespread, and the reason for use follows global patterns: information seeking, communication, entertainment, including gaming. They also reported using social media for learning new skills, content creation, and even generating income through sale and resale of goods. Third, social media provided opportunities to connect. One of the biggest reported attractions was meeting people beyond their immediate environment, including romantic partners. Connecting was especially important for marginalized children who told us that social media enabled them to be in touch with people who are like them, such as children with similar disabilities, and for refugee children, it enabled them to stay connected with families and friends and keep up with news from home. But of course, in addition to the opportunities, they did share the risks they faced. 2 out of the 4 children reported having bad experiences that they didn't want to tell anyone about, both boys and girls. And young people reported being contacted by strangers online, accepting requests from people they didn't know, being sent or being asked to send explicit materials, and being asked to meet. And more than half of the teens we spoke to said yes, that they had met someone in real life that they had initially met online. Parents reported their deep concerns about online harms, especially risks posed by strangers, and to protect children, their most frequent response was to restrict internet access or confiscate phones, rather than supporting young people to manage those risks. We have to take risks seriously, but we also note that risks do not automatically translate into harm. And when designing strategies, designing programs, it's really important to note some key findings. So while children said yes, they readily accepted chat and friend requests, they also employed risk mitigation measures. They blocked people when, in their words, things get creepy, and some changed their account. And the vast majority of children said that they did not share images and information when asked. Most were well aware that adults can pretend to be children online. And where they did meet someone offline, these meetings were thankfully largely benign, and the person who they met were the person who they said they were online. And an important reflection for programming is that the concept of strangers online doesn't really exist for children. And so messaging on stranger danger doesn't resonate in a sphere where connecting with and gaming with people you don't know is part and parcel of being online. Lastly, we also found that the majority of children who reported harmful experiences were also those who faced heightened vulnerability offline. And so while tech played a facilitating role, research also showed that the nexus between offline and online vulnerability is absolutely critical to consider for programming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey, for this shocking sometimes, but also very realistic numbers and facts. Dr. Al-Imadi, how do children today view the internet and the digital world?
I think I want to even talk about the numbers of or the percentage of the situation in MENA region and Qatar relate to what they said, and then my experience as a clinical psychologist in this scary maybe finding that we heard from our colleagues. If we there is very few research talking, as they said, about the usage of how the children see what they're using, or how they feel about what they're using, and how this what is in the digital can affect them from their point of view. We always talk about our point of view as an adult. Another thing is that if we will see that the percentage in MENA region, 9 of 10 children using different kind of social media, or even 100% in Qatar, the children have access to internet. And also, like from 2015 to 2017, from 27% to 85% using these kind of digital increased. That's give us like alarm that, okay, what is positive and what is negative to that. And as I said, if we will take it from their point of view, we don't have information and research related to that. But with what we see as a individual, as a clinical psychologist, we saw many cases that went to addicts to these devices or to different kind of programs. We saw that they faced bullying, and they became had the self-esteem, and this guide them to do like destructive behavior, even relate to the gaming and addicted to gaming. All these kind of negative things will it's happened to the individual that we see them in the clinic. But if we looked at the number of the percentage of using these kind of devices or internet, we have a percentage that can to be ready for it and to find a solution. Mm-hmm. And maybe in MENA region, especially maybe in Qatar or GCC areas, if the children even faced the violence or faced any problems in the internet, they will. There is a stigma related to that, especially if there is a girl faced anything. So to even go and talk about it, or to record about it from family even, it will be difficult for them. So how we can help our children, how we can educate them to talk about it and not to keep them silent, because this is a kind of violence that they're facing. Also, it's not the amount of, many research talk about the amount of, or the numbers of hours that the children using in the internet. It's not the how many
numbers.
hours. It's the quality or what they're doing and how they're using this kind of digital. So it is this is even the concern of government and families that okay, we cannot stop our children using these devices because all the information, especially after COVID-19, they studying from like virtual, and they do all their research, and they will learn. We cannot say that we cannot learn from the internet, even us as adults. So we have to let them to take information, to have more knowledge about around the world, and it's easier now. But at the same time, our concern how they use it, what they are doing, who's contacting them when it's a stranger, and how they dealing with all these things, what kind of behavior is taking from using of the internet. So many things relate to that. We were lucky as a Doha International Family Institution. We did a survey before COVID-19 to measure the well-being of children. Then after COVID-19, we did post a questionnaire, and we realized that especially in many negative and positive things happened, monitoring the children from the family, they stay more with them together, the healthy food, everything was positive. But when we came to the using of the internet, it's increased, and the activities, like different activities, it's decreased. So that's mean there is like after COVID-19, because of the situation, and it wasn't for a study, it was for entertainment and for gaming. So there is something we have to focus and we have to do more research to understand, relate to your question, to understand their point of view and their perception of using different kind of...
Whereas lockdown maybe could have been the perfect chance for parents to monitor what their children
exactly. And this increased already in our research. Like they stayed more hours, but the problem is even the children, and this research shows that they like to stay with the digital and internet and the different devices than spending time with their family. And this is also alarming for families.
Dr. Livingston, the same question goes to you now, especially after COVID-19, and we introduced devices even for children who didn't use devices before and digital technology. How do children first view this medium?
Thank you for the question. I would like first to echo and agree with what my colleagues on this panel have said. I think the research and policy world are coming to a much more kind of a rounded sense of the importance of technologies in children's lives. Children are growing up in a digital world, and some of the old kind of panics that we had about how this is, as it were, ruining childhood, I think we have set aside. But in so doing, the evidence takes us to recognizing the importance of a more contextualized and more differentiated account in which we really think, as the last speaker just articulated, we really think about the particular needs, the particular purposes children have for engaging with the digital world, and the supports and the problems in their life world, in their context of living, that kind of facilitates or hinders their access and their benefit from the digital world. So I think we're all coming to this kind of more contextualized approach, and it reflects what children themselves say. So there's been more and more consultation directly with children around the world in recent years, and we see children both saying the digital is our world. This is where we live. This is ours. We should have the right to access. They often say also, and at the same time they themselves articulate a a view of how it doesn't serve their interests, how in many ways that digital world, that digital environment has been designed for adults. It's been designed in ways that don't recognize their needs, their vulnerabilities. Often the digital world doesn't speak to them in their own, literally in their own language, and also in a children's language, in a way that they can understand and feel welcome. And so it is a struggle for them. You know, both they love everything technological. They feel that it belongs to their generation more than the older generation. They're very keen to tell us how adults, older people don't understand their activities, the meanings they find online, the sense of belonging and identity that they find online. And at the same time, they feel often frustrated by how unwelcome they might be in certain digital spaces, or how difficult it is for them to have their needs met. So I think so I'm speaking really on the basis of the Global Kids Online Research Project, which I've done jointly with UNICEF and partners around the world. And we've worked in many countries, really getting a sense of the often very different experiences that children have in different parts of the world. And those differences are partly because countries are different on many dimensions, but also because the internet is different in different parts of the world. You know, along the whole kind of path from access, which is access considerations and barriers to access, are very, very salient to children still in most parts of the world. But even once they're online, for some children, the internet speaks to them in their language. In others, they have to struggle. In some, they have a very kind of hate-filled or very fraught and risky environment. And others, there are many more protections built in that do address children's needs and rights. In some parts of the world, parents are more anxious or more punitive and will punish children for doing the wrong thing online. And in other parts of the world, parents play a more empowering and enabling role because of the culture, or perhaps because of the familiarity with the internet, or even because the internet itself is not so risky in their country. So in Global Kids Online, we see enormous
That's why I feel it needs a political that's why
Sorry?
I feel it needs a political will, because the digital world is designed for consumers who are grown-ups, who are adults, who can pay, who can be commercially interesting, whereas for children it needs to be government invested or NGO invested to have to prepare for them content that is more suitable for their needs and interests. Professor Vikram Patel, everyone here voiced the concern about the danger that children can face online, but you are also advocating the quality they could have, the qualitative time they can have online. How can we educate parents and caregivers to have this balance for children?
Yeah, I think this is the big question, and I think the question really is, what is the kind of guidance we want to give to parents? And I think I completely agree with all the fellow panelists who said the picture is much more mixed, it's more nuanced. And in fact, my sense is the vast majority of children and adolescents use the internet in ways that are very much more meaningful to them. The question really is that this diversity, that adolescents and children represent very different groups. Not just countries are different, but within countries, there are hugely different experiences of children and young people. And so my sense is the most important guidance to give parents isn't a binary one, let them use the screen or not to use the screen, or even a quantitative one, how much screen time should you use, but actually to engage with their children to find out why they're using the digital world, in what way are they using it, what are they finding useful and what are they finding harmful, to actually become a partner with the child, to gain their trust, rather than looking over their shoulder to peep into what they're doing, actually sitting by their side to actually be part of that engagement. I think that would be one kind of advice I would give parents in order to be able to really unpack what's going on in their child's lives. And, actually, to be honest, this is what we also say with friends. Get to know your kids' friends. And in the social world, of course, has completely expanded the notion and the definition of friends. But I think you can extend the same idea from the previous times when it was get to know your friends by calling them over for a play day to actually let's sit together and see who you're talking to, how did you meet this person, etc.
Actually, with the findings of Dr. Livingston, I felt like the times didn't really change that much. Children still feel misunderstood by grown-ups, so that's a good point. We can start there. Dr. Livingston, what are the ongoing tools to better assess and to better manage the interface between children and the digital medium?
I think the tools are developing. Are you thinking of the kind of tools on the devices, on the various services? I think they are developing. I would love to see them develop much faster. And everything I learn about different parts of the world is that, as I tried to say, in some parts of the world, there's been a lot of effort by companies and also by the state to kind of build tools that will keep children safer and kind of respond to the risks that they face, so that if something goes wrong, they've got someone to call or a button to press or a help service behind the screen, as it were. But I think in many parts of the world that still is not in place, and enormous efforts are really still needed so that children have the freedom to explore, which is is very important to their development, but with protections built in and responsive services. And even, I'm sitting in a relatively wealthy country here in London, but even here children will say over and again, I want the freedom to explore, to find information, to find the spaces where I can belong. But when things go wrong, I don't have the trust that the services will be there to help me, and that the technology companies or the welfare services will kind of step in and look after me. I think as they probably would be more likely to in the offline world, if you like, but it's still new online, and it's still a struggle to make sure that the right supports are there in place. And often when they are there, they're complicated, they're difficult to work. People are frustrated that they don't quite provide what they want. So, back to the message of the panel, how important it is to listen to children and what it is that they ask for.
Ms. Harvey, you mentioned that the notion of strangers is not the same in real life as in the digital world for children. So how can we promote a more protective behavior for children online? You need to unmute.
So we have to think of the framework around the child. So first of all, the child themselves, and something that the others have said, is this link between online and offline. So first of all, we need to understand how children use frameworks and platforms and how they perceive risks. And information, messaging, skills development, it needs to be shaped by evidence of what works to reduce risky behaviors and promote positive behaviors. As another panelist said, we shouldn't impose our adult perceptions on what we think works. It has to come from evidence. But there's not a great deal of evidence about what works. And actually in this region, we're spearheading an initiative with ICT to close this gap. But what we do know is that the online and offline spheres should not be artificially separated. We must equip children with knowledge and digital literacy skills appropriate to their age, but we've also got to recognize the importance of interpersonal skills development, such as communication, such as conflict resolution, and the resilience to help children navigate the internet safely, to make appropriate choices and mitigate the risks that they encounter. Comprehensive sexuality education is also a key element, and making this division between online and offline spheres is not helpful. It's critical to foster resilience in broad terms so that children have the skills to navigate risks offline and online, so they don't turn into harm. And just maybe to pick up on the parents, because our research really showed that there's not strong digital literacy and understanding among parents and caregivers. A preferred approach is to restrict, and it's to block access and to take devices away. And these attitudes are often informed predominantly by these headlines of fear and risks and harms. And very few parents are engaging in talking to their children constructively and looking at this as online skills development as part of childhood development. And on the opposite side, teens are saying if restrictions are imposed, we know how to get around them. And as one child said to us, the strictest parents create the sneakiest children. And they told us then they're reluctant to raise concern with their parents because they fear that when their parents hear about the risks, they'll take away access. So they stay quiet. So what we need to do is equip parents with knowledge, with skills, with an understanding of how risks can be navigated, and recognizing that their children's skills and capacities are evolving in the same way as they are in the offline world, and to foster an openness that encourages children to share concerns and bad experience, seek guidance, seek support, so that they're not going to think we're going to automatically block it. We're going to listen, and we're going to help you navigate these risks to take better decisions. And as a policy and a strategic approach, digital literacy and digital parenting should be integrated into parenting programs that governments and other NGOs and other actors run.
You made me laugh about the sneakiest children, because it reminded me of my son. He came to me and he tried to talk to my feminist side, and he was like, Mom, you have to be a strong woman. Don't listen to Dad and give me the iPad.
I agree, and I want to really to engage in what my colleague said. It's really interesting, but always as a family or parents, we blame our children while we are a role model for them.
Exactly.
So in our research in Doha International Institution, most of the children, maybe 85%, they said that our parents, they're using the devices or mobiles extremely. They said it in this way.
So exactly, this is the question. When we talk about children using 85% and more during COVID, how can we tell children that you have to be using it less or better when we are setting bad examples?
So as a psychologist, we are a role model. So if we are using all internet and digital like technology all the time, so they will do the same. Another thing is that it's as you said, we cannot deal with them and tell them don't do this or do this. We have to create another activities for them. What we did for them, when I will start like a young children 4 years and less than that. The research shows like last research 4 years and above, but now we see less than this year they're using internet. Why we give them already the iPad and let them to like play with it or to look at to use to it? Why we don't read the books for them? So it's our responsibility. Another thing that if I will see my children using these technologies, I will do another activities, and especially physical activities, and I will encourage them to play with me. So this is another option. Also, it's very important, as my colleague said, we have to learn to know what is their life, what is the interesting of things in the digital. I remember before even I get married, when you say to my nephew that why you 24 hours just facing this. He said you don't know the positive taste of staying and playing that. So I try to understand him why he said that, while I don't feel this interesting in playing these games. So it's very important to engage them, to talk about them. Very important things that why they will go, especially the little like teenagers will go to talk with a stranger with this kind of digital, because nobody listening to them, and these people are clever and they know how to listen to the children to take them to exactly what they want to, maybe sexual violence and these things that will take them to this stage. Because they know how to talk to them, they know exactly how to listen to them, how to communicate with them. So it's very important to listen to our children, to talk with them, to give them a chance to express their feeling. When my nephew said that it is
Simulating.
it's it's something you cannot feel it. So I told him, okay, good. I want to understand what is this feeling. I want you to show me why it is interesting for you. I will not say no. It is something like your generation do it, we don't do. We prefer to read books or to look at the different devices, while we are even in our generation doing playing these games and doing these things. So why I don't engage in these games and play with them? So it's very important to educate family from the beginning. So when I will start to think to have a child, I have to do parenting. Yeah. And in all aspects, it's not just in relate to digital, because I can see some new mothers that they prefer to give the iPad to their young child just to see films because they are busy, they don't want to hear their voice or something like that. So it is started from us as a family, as a parent. So it's very important to educate the children and to engage in their interested things, and at the same time to involve in all the activities that they do and listen to them. It's very important listening to your child.
If we want them to have quality time online, we have to give them quality time as well. Professor Vikram, how can industries and governments ensure that there is online content for children and it is high quality and useful?
So there's a real tension here between actually censorship and monitoring and making this information available, creating opportunities for designers to create information and engagement kind of interaction for children and young people. My own sense is we haven't found the right balance to this, but I think, as my fellow panelists have really emphasized, I think the right thing to do is to have parents, teachers, and others who are actually involved in the daily lives of children and young people, actively engaging with them as they interact with the social world. Of course, I think there is a broader societal concern, and I must acknowledge that, the need for some kind of societal watchdog or monitor to make sure that content on the internet, and this is not just for children and young people, I think this applies across the board, but perhaps more specifically for children and young people. One of my colleagues spoke, for example, about the risks that more vulnerable children and young people have of being groomed for sexual exploitation. There's no question at all that there needs to be much more robust monitoring and surveillance. And this requires not just governments to be doing that, but very importantly, the large media companies, the tech companies that actually, we're hearing all the time, for example, of how Facebook and other social media companies are being misused by people for very, very awful reasons. For example, for generating hateful reactions between subgroups in the population, or by subverting elections, etc. And of course, the same platforms are also being used for nefarious purposes to hurt the well-being of kids. And I think, therefore, we must make it their responsibility. It has to be their responsibility. Ultimately, they're selling a product, and I think it is their responsibility to make sure that that product doesn't cause harm, in the same kind of way that we hold tobacco companies responsible, really, to make sure that the product doesn't cause harm to children and young people. I think we really need to put that responsibility. But of course, the state needs to have very robust legal instruments and surveillance mechanisms to make sure that children are being protected.
I will move to the Q&As with you, Dr. Livingston. You have a question from the audience. Today, the number of children with access to the internet and to a range of digital devices has been steadily increasing. How does the active engagement of children in digital world relate to the construct of well-being, especially as regards its social, cultural implications, with focus on the critical cultural tradition rather than the media effects tradition?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, and I understand it, I think, as saying we've often asked what it is that the technology, that the digital world does to children. Does it improve their well-being? And we've actually struggled, I think, as we heard right at the start, to really show that the technology in and of itself improves well-being. What we see rather is that if we think about children's context of life, their need for belonging, their cultural traditions of which they are part, and their social and information needs, then we can understand whether and how the technology can benefit them. And we can, if you like, kind of follow their pathways through their engagement with technology and show it can benefit, but also how it can go wrong and how the vulnerabilities they experience in their lives or that they encounter through their digital engagement, these vulnerabilities can mean that adverse outcomes result, and that undermines their well-being. So, you know, it's very different pathways followed for children. Our aim, of course, from the research world and also policy makers and practitioners, professionals, is to try to find ways to think of those pathways in a positive direction that benefits well-being. So I think in this panel so far, we've talked a little about binary outcomes. You know, is technology good or bad? I think it would be helpful to think also about pathways to learning, pathways to resilience, pathways to well-being, and what are all the factors that can help a child along that journey.
Professor Patel, we have a question for you. You mentioned the importance of not generalizing the broad positives and negatives of social media. Are there different mental health, both positive or negative, depending on the type of social media platform used? Are there tailored responses that children or their parents can adopt?
So, you know, this has, of course, been one of the most important areas of research to look at whether or not the use of social media influences your mental health. And again, the answers are very, very mixed. Clearly, there is a group of young people where the use of social media is strongly correlated with poor mental health. Now, the problem is unpacking the direction of causality. Is it the case that young people who are going through mental health difficulties, who are depressed because, for example, they're very lonely at home, they don't have good relationships with siblings or other students in school, that they're actually turning to social media as a way of actually coping with that loneliness? And so you find an association, but the association really is because the young person is trying to use social media to cope with poor mental health? Or is it the other way around? That because you're using social media, you're now getting into a web in which you are comparing yourself unfavorably, for example, with other people, or you're getting abused online. Is that why you're getting poor mental health? Unfortunately, I think the evidence is still very, very mixed. We can't really unpack these. And my own prediction is that there will not be a single answer. There will not be one size fits all. And it will well be that in some individuals' lives, it is one direction, and in other individuals' life, it is the other direction. So I think the focus shouldn't be so much on the digital media itself. I believe the focus should be on making sure that young people have alternative avenues to address their distress, and they don't have to necessarily turn to social media when they're distressed.
Ms. Harvey, I have a question for you. It feels like coming from a child. Are there some easy steps to adopt to communicate to parents on the management of online risk so that they don't blanketly ban internet access? In other words, many children don't come to their parents to tell them what they're facing, whether it's bullying or sexual harassment online, because they're afraid they will ban them from using the internet. How can they report it to parents and get them to support them? You need to unmute again.
So I think that this is a really important question. Thank you to the person who asked it. And it's almost though putting the burden on children to find the right way to speak to their parents and caregivers. And actually, it should be the other way around. It should be parents and caregivers and professionals and educators ensuring that the way that they communicate about online risks and harms enable children to feel safe and supported to have an open dialogue about their experiences, so that when they suffer something, when they experience something, when they have a concern about something, they know that they can speak out, and the immediate reaction will be understanding, listening, not blaming the child, and seeing how they can help them navigate the risks. And this is the same for offline as well. We often hear from violence against children surveys, especially about sexual violence, that when children experience that, most children never tell anyone about their experiences. And when they do speak out, it's not always to family members, because they're scared of being blamed, they're scared of being shut down and silenced, and they're scared of the stigma. So again, it's our responsibility as adults, as caregivers, as parents, as educators, to create an environment where children feel safe, not blamed, supported, and given the tools and information that they need to be able to navigate safely. So I would say, if that's a young person that asks, the burden shouldn't be on your shoulders. It should be on ours as adults to create that environment for you.
Dr. Sharifa, we have a question for you. How much do parents' digital skill or media literacy predict or affect children's well-being in relation to the children's media use?
Sure, it's very important to learn as a parent what is going on in the digital, so we can engage. And this will even will create good relationship with our children. When we will understand how they feel about a game, or to play with them, or how they to engage in any kind of a program or films that they like to see together, and communicate during the playing or engaging to indirect positive and negative things that happening in this program. So the communication even will open space for the children to, if they face any problem, they will talk about it. If they feel that there is something like dangerous, they will discuss it with their family. So it's very important to understand exactly what they are doing, how they doing this, and who's they even contact there, especially as the professor said, that to know our children friends. So when they will see them in normal life, it's more important to know who they already contact with, and to understand if they are, the same age, or they, just people that they are just dangerous for them or not.
But many children today also talk about privacy. So how can you be their friend and not their parent when it comes to this, for them to include you in their private circle?
I think it's meaning to be friend with your children. This will give this relationship. If you are good in this, then the privacy, it's something that when they will feel dangerous, they will talk about it. When there is something they have to talk about it, they will talk about it. I don't have to know everything about my children. Privacy is very important. But it's very important when they face any problems, when they have any challenges, will be the most safest person for them. It's the parents, not others that they will give them another things. And it's not easy. We can say it easily, but it's to start from a very young age to have this relationship with my child. That's why it's very important, especially in our region, to have a policy to even force the new mothers to, or fathers, like parents, to engage in a training how to raise their children. It's very important.
Especially that we're using new techniques in parenting that we didn't have ourselves as children, so we don't actually have reference to it. So it won't harm anyone to have such a training.
I think it's, sorry to say that, I think if we as a psychologist will stay with young mothers and talk about, or parents, talk about the challenges that we faced with our client who faced problems because they're using digital, I think they will understand the cause of this, so they will protect their children from these harms.
Because there's a thin line between being a helicopter mom and a supportive mom. Professor Patel, I have a question for you. What is the basic level of provision access that you consider a minimum right for children in the digital age? Do governments have a duty to provide this basic level?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no question in my mind that governments have a duty, but let's be very clear: the governments have a duty to support the parents of children. That is the most important caregiver for children today. Governments have a fundamental duty, and for me, really the most important role of government is to recognize the diversity of experiences that parents have in their country, in their communities, and particularly target resources to those who have the greatest need. And in most parts of the world, that will usually be families who are low income, but there are also other groups of families which need additional resources. So parenting support is critical. I also want to add, as we talk about remote learning, which of course is a very important positive use of the digital world, we need to recognize that actually the digital divide was great even before the pandemic, and inequalities risk being further enhanced in the last 8 or 9 months because of the shift of schooling to digital worlds. And so it's also very important for governments to be recognizing this and ensuring that families who do not have access to the internet or devices are being adequately equipped so that their kids don't fall further behind.
I have a question that will go for all of you, so I will start with you, Professor Patel. What specific policy recommendations do you think government should adopt urgently to safeguard children while online? Briefly, because we're in our last minutes.
Just two things I want to say. First of all, I think we do need to have more robust monitoring of the big tech companies. And secondly, I think we need more research to be able to unpack the individual characteristics of children and the way they use the internet that can help us understand what causes harm.
Ms. Harvey, what's in your opinion, the most urgent policy that needs to be taken by governments?
So I think in addition to integrating into the school curriculum outreach into children to ensure that they have the skills to navigate risks wherever they occur, ensure that parents have the skills and understanding to support their children, we must recognize a nexus between online and offline vulnerabilities to reduce those vulnerabilities to prevent harm in all spheres. We must have robust child protection and justice systems to prevent, support children to recover, hold perpetrators accountable. And the ICT industry has a clear role to play in creating safer platforms for children. And the policies and programs that seek to enhance and protect the well-being of children must be rooted in evidence of how children interact online, the impact, what works, rather than only our assumptions and perceptions as adults.
Dr. Livingston, your thought?
Well, I agree with everything that has been said, and since some of my favourite points are already made, let me add something about the profitability of the companies who are providing the digital infrastructure in our world, because it is currently in their interests as part of the attention economy to take children, all of us, ever more in the direction of extreme content, problematic content, content that gathers attention and likes and so forth. And we see children over and again being taken down a dangerous journey. And we could change that. We could disrupt this attention economy. We could regulate the algorithms in children's best interests so that they do find and are taken towards more diverse content, more beneficial content, content that offers them more quality and better engagement. But we need to intervene in the business model of the platforms. And at the moment, I think we have not addressed that in children's rights and best interests.
Especially that this business is based on our attention and our psyche, our mental health, our knowledge. Dr. Al-Imadi, what policy needs to be taken urgently by governments?
I can't agree more with my colleagues. That they said most of the things, but I think that I will add that engaging young in the research to see their perception, and I agree to control that platform from the ICT. So it's very important, and this point it came from parents in one of our research.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Vikram Patel, the Perishing Square Professor of Global Health in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard University. Dr. Rachel Harvey from UNICEF, Regional Advisor on Child Protection for East Asia and the Pacific region, Dr. Sharifa Nu'man Al-Imadi, Executive Director at the Doha International Family Institute, and Professor Sonia Livingston, Professor of Social Psychology in the Department of Media and Communications at LSE, the London School of Economics and Political Science. Thank you everyone for joining us, and now we can stop for our closing ceremony. We're almost at the end of today's program, and it's time to check in on the artist Safiya Al-Bahlani and see if she's finished the art piece specially commissioned for today.